Thank you for joining us. The death toll from devastating floods in Mokwa, Niger State has risen. Emergency officials say, as at the last count, at least 115 people have been confirmed dead, with many more still unaccounted for. Officials say the flooding followed hours of torrential rain Wednesday night, submerging more than 50 homes in the market town. The National Emergency Management Agency says rescue efforts began early Thursday morning and are still ongoing. The Niger State Emergency Management Agency earlier confirmed 36 deaths, but the figure has surged as more bodies are recovered. Rescue teams are searching for the missing, with concerns that the death toll could still rise. Let's talk about this now. We're joined by Salaudeen Hashim. He is an Abuja-based environmentalist and program director at CLEEN Foundation. Thank you very much for giving us your time. I mean, in September of last year, we had a situation. There was torrential rains, the dam collapsed in Maiduguri, about 30 people and millions of others were displaced. 30 died, millions were displaced. The figure for that year alone, we lost 1,200 people in at least 31 out of 36 states. It's one of the worst we've ever experienced in decades. And of course, there was a lot of hue and cry, and donations were made, photo ops were done. From that experience, did you expect we will be back here again with the rains barely getting started?
Thank you very much for having me. I think it is quite unfortunate that the profound disaster that has become very perennial is actually taking lives. And this is as a result of our inability to provide adequate planning. And this in itself has also affected very clearly one singular issue about the cost of life in Nigeria. One of the cheapest things in this country now is the life of citizens. And there seems to be no any strategy by the state, even though there's a shared blame when it comes to the conversation around rainfall and how this affects society. But I think, again, government can come with some very clear plans in terms of how to set out and, of course, plan for all of these forecasts, urban and regional planning, and of course provide consistent efforts in terms of sensitizations and awareness. Mokwa is actually in a very topography where tides and water has the threats to consistently displace people. And of course, because again, we run a system where government takes the life of citizens very trivial, it became very unusual for them to have thought out on the best way to have mitigated from the lessons learned. And if you check very clearly, some of the trajectory of what we recorded from previous years suggested that we should have provided adequate infrastructure that will help to prevent reoccurrence for this year. This is actually something that happened between April and September of every year. And recall that we are only just in May, and we still have a very long time to go for the rest of the rainy season. And we're already recording this very huge number of fatalities and casualties. And I think this is unfortunate, and it is something that we really need to pay very clear attention to. And in itself, what is our environmental plan in terms of ensuring that we take care of drainage systems, and of course, government in itself ensuring that adequate awareness and proactive responses are put in place to be able to prevent, contain, and deter the occurrences of incidences like this. We are very good in response. But what exactly do we invest in prevention? And that in itself for me is where I get quite uneasy with the kind of approach that we put in place for governance. So
okay, I just want to pick on two things you've talked about. Our environmental plan. Do we have one as of today in this country? And when you talk about response, I mean, you said we are good at response, but we've lost 30 people already just this week. Are you concerned about the quality of emergency responses that are being provided in areas like this?
Absolutely. I am concerned about the quality of response. We do response, but we don't do proactive response. And that for me is actually where the little demarcation really lies. Proactive response, therefore, means that at the very point where early warning has been picked, that this had begun to happen, what are the kind of rescue infrastructure that we have deployed to sites? Now we are relying on fishermen who are helping to scout out adequate number, because the number of casualties we have now are just estimated because search and rescue are still ongoing. Perhaps by the time this is done, and of course you know too well that one of the things that we underrate for a very long time is actually the torrential strength that water brings, and opportunities are there that some people might have been washed away. And one of the things that we need to do at this point is to open a register for family members to actually document those who are missing. And then, of course, at the end of the day, we can account for bodies, we can account for those who are missing, and then, of course, the research can go on.
Talk to us, yes, Mr. Hashim, talk to us about the environmental plan. The emergency response, I mean, that's been worked on, and you've made some very valid submissions. But I'm really curious as to, I mean, we have the meteorological agency. They come up with this warning all the time, asking people to move to higher grounds in flood-prone areas. But that doesn't seem to be working. Talk to us about our environmental plan, long-term.
Response plan that the country is actually putting in place, but again, we do not have strategies for implementation at the moment, and that in itself for me is one thing that perhaps would have mitigated the crisis that we have. But in terms of environmental plan, I think one of the things that has been able to work for us is the fact that we conceive an idea, but again, how we operationalize it is what is not done. And the major challenge with this is that there is going to be a deficit in interagency collaboration and coordination for this kind of responses, because one of the mitigating response within the environmental plan is to ensure that we have a scenario where every agency in the back end can actually be participant, because environment is actually connecting with the human daily lives and daily existence at every point, whether it is something that deals with agriculture, whether it is something that deals with development, whether you have to have a robust mechanism that helps you to deploy this. But one of the things we have in this country currently is that we have a plan that is in a draft that is not currently operational and that has not been given any form of formal assent. And I think it is very important that we begin to take some of this entry very seriously. If you don't have one in the first place, how would you design a strategy for response? So if those two things are not syncing, what perhaps might therefore happen is you see everybody coming with all manner of ideas for purposes of mitigation, and it doesn't work that way. You need to develop a sequence approach for responses so that at least you don't create additional environmental disaster. But we are seeing what is going on just as a mere layman response to an environmental disaster, because of course this has happened. I tell you, you go to different communities in the next few weeks, we will see the same thing. Government, as it were, does not have any legitimate, robust mechanism to manage a situation like this in a proactive way, and that is unfortunate.
Really unfortunate. I was just going to ride off and say that, I mean, we have a federal government, we have agencies that should be pushing for the implementation of our environmental plan, but that does not seem to be happening. But in the short term, there has to be some effort to help with the situation. You mentioned earlier that the plain we have, Mokwa, is quite prone to flood, and we know we have a couple of dams around that area. One thing that has come up from this, and I really want your perspective on it, chairman of the Mokwa community suggested that poor infrastructure worsened the impact of the flood. While we are waiting for long-term, there are some short-term measures that the government can do. Long overdue construction of waterways in Mokwa under what he described as a climate resilient project, using that as a yardstick. Infrastructure in these flood-prone areas. What will it take to put them on the ground?
I believe very clearly that we have an ecological fund that is about 2% or thereabout of our national budget that is meant to be invested in climate resilience, adaptation, and mitigation. That ecological fund has become a largesse in different you see, the fact is that the deficit in accountability in our entire life has actually, in our entire governance life, has actually gradually crept in to affect every other aspect. Government had planning for all of this. For instance, if you interrogate the ecological fund and ask what it's being used for, Mokwa and the kind of terrain that we have there should enjoy the largesse of government generosity in infrastructure investment because that funding is available. The question is, what exactly would the state say they have done with the amount that comes to them on a periodic basis from the ecological fund? And so it has become the backpack, the money that most governments use as part of their own monthly pocket allowances in most instances, putting the life of citizens in a very difficult state. Because if you check what has happened and the terrain, there should be some adaptation mechanisms, adaptation practices. Even when it comes to farming, adaptation plans should be there, resilience for women, and how all of these things collaborate in a robust manner to ensure that the environment is constantly adapted. Because the environment also gets a little bit very uneasy with the activities of human. So if the activities are not friendly, it gets to a point the environment will also respond. And that is exactly what we have done. But we have some level of resources that we separate on a monthly basis that goes into our annual budget that is separated for this purpose. The question is, where does that money go? Who collects that money? And what is it being used for? And I think media platforms like this should be asking question, where is the ecological fund? How are they being used? And why is it that these kind of things are happening when we have such kind of fund that is proactively separated? It is actually a first line charge that is actually separated, but unfortunately, because of accountability deficit, those monies are not used judiciously, and these are the consequences that we see.
We know that climate change plays a role in what we're seeing today, and the rains are just getting started. What would be some of the proactive actions you would recommend for people in these riverine communities, in places that are prone to flood and torrential rains like this? What should they be doing, pending when government will take the bigger actions to protect them?
First of all, is for them to vacate those areas and find alternatives, because their lives is the most important thing at the moment, because of course government will only show up when lives are already lost. So it is very important to find some personal safety tips, stay away from high-risk areas, find some solace in areas with low risk. Two is to deploy technology forecasts for you to check, because again, these are some of the things citizens don't also pay attention to. Every single day, it is very important that you do a forecast and check what does the weather looks like. Then, of course, that can help you to plan your day. And I think technology should be, it is very easy. Almost everybody has a smartphone. So you can use that to begin to check what the terrain looks like. And then, of course, you can take some cover. The third one is for them to be able to find some immediate help that will make them to resettle, because as it were, we don't have an official IDP camp in this country, as it were, so they may have to cluster around a particular community that will host them in the interim. But it is very important for them to find adequate mitigation that will help them to stay safe in the interim. And then, of course, for the State Emergency Management Agency, it is only time to share blankets and mattress, and that will be the end. And then, of course, there will be no other holy grail or cavalry that might come anymore, because once government does that, that's the end, and people are left to their fate. So it is very important that citizens learn the art of personal safety in the interim.
Quite unfortunate. Something you said just now is still ringing in my head, and sad that government only shows up when lives are lost. It is a sad, trajectory to be pushing at this time, but it is the reality. Thank you for speaking with us. We appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for having me.